Okay, I think I have everything all set up and working for a change. Um, if any of you have any problems with seeing or hearing me, just please comment on the live stream and I'll see what I can do. Meanwhile, let's get started with our Q&A today. I was going to talk about any questions people have with the 6-step framework from Six Pack Apps. So if you have any questions, please do comment on the live stream. I've got this running on Facebook and on YouTube right now, on my private channel on YouTube. And if we don't have any questions, I have some questions that people have asked me before that I will be covering today. So one of the more interesting questions I had was somebody asked me if I could go back before I created my app and tell myself something about what the app experience was like, how to avoid mistakes. What would that be? So I think I made some of the most basic mistakes in my first app, as most people do who haven't been through a course or read my framework. And that first one is focusing on the audience. Like, really, I had a really good idea for my app. My first app, if you are unfamiliar with it, was called Wimby, or Wells in My Backyard. And it is a uniquely Canadian app with data from Canada on abandoned wells and their locations, because there are some interesting legal loopholes around whether or not people are required to tell you that there used to be a well on your property. And people have been drilling for oil in especially Western Canada for like 100 years. And there's a lot of holes in the ground. Like, last time I checked, it was approaching 900,000. It might have gone past that already. So yeah, lots of holes in the ground. And most of them are in Alberta, which is the province I live in. And a lot of them have been abandoned. And there was a circumstance where someone thought they smelled a funny smell in the backyard of their relatively new build house. And it turned out there was a funny smell because there was a well in their backyard that had been abandoned in the 1950s. And that was in the Wild West times where there were no rules around well abandonment. And so it hadn't been properly completed, closed off, and sealed. And so it was leaking. And that became a huge problem for many people in that community, for the company that ended up being responsible, even though they hadn't drilled the wells. They purchased the company that had. It was a nightmare. Anyway, so this is what brought me to this understanding that there's wells out there that nobody knows about, and they could be in your backyard. So I thought that was appalling. I was dealing with that data, so I built Wimby from that. It was kind of like a public service, only I thought I could make some money from it. But it turns out the average person doesn't really know about this problem. And I didn't think this through very much. I just thought this was an awesome idea. And, I should build this app and people will just come and get it, because wouldn't you want to know if you had a well in your backyard? So it turns out people don't really care unless maybe they're buying a house. If I had spent a little bit more time talking to average people and not, my friends and family about it, I might have discovered this. Over time, I did learn that there are actually a couple of niche audiences who will not only pay, but pay good money for this kind of an app. One, not people buying a house, people selling houses, realtors. Realtors, of course, would love to be able to provide that kind of information to their customers. And since they're making money when they're selling houses, anything that helps them avoid mistakes like selling somebody a house with an abandoned well on the property, that's kind of big for them. So yeah, they'll definitely want to know. And in my subsequent years of basically talking to people and showing them my app, I encountered another group. These are people who do environmental assessments. Again, these are highly paid professionals who do work for which, governments pay them, companies pay them, and they pay them a lot of money. And having this little app on their phone that lets them see that there's a well there, and not having to drag a computer around or check this offline somewhere, this is pretty huge for them. So again, this is a niche audience, but the convenience for them is huge, and they totally would pay a decent amount of money for such an app. So I did not actually find these before I built the app. And if I had, I could have customized it more for these niches. I could have built two apps, two smaller apps, and really nailed the experience for realtors and for environmental assessment professionals. So there you go. I could go back to myself back when I first came up with the idea of building Wimby as an app. And I would say, find an audience, a niche audience who will pay for the app. Now, that wasn't an app being built for a specific business. I'm just double checking to see if we have anybody asking questions. I don't see it yet, so I'll keep going. The whole concept of building an app for your business, you already have an audience. So you just want to really make sure that you're focusing on that audience and not on yourself. It is very dangerous to build an app because it's going to make things easier for you. That's a danger sign right there. Building an app to make things easier for you. Because if it's going to be easier for you, that means people are actually using the app, right? And how are you going to make sure these people use the app unless you focused on their problems, solving their problems, providing ways for their lives to be easier, providing ways for them to make more money, providing ways to entertain them. However your app comes into being, whatever the idea is, focus in on that audience. Okay. The next question that people ask me is about the next step. Designing before developing. And a lot of people get really wrapped up in, I'm not a designer, I can't design an app. And one of the things that surprising number of people get wrapped up in is the whole concept of a color palette for their app. They don't want their app to be, the stock sort of color scheme, the default color scheme that Apple or Google provides with iOS or Android. And I get that. I mean, those apps are kind of boring to look at. Although if they're functional, I'm not sure I really care about how colorful they are. But there's some really simple stuff. If you have a business, there's a good chance that you already have some sort of brand going on. You have a website, you have colors that you use in your brand. Hello, there's your color palette for your app. It doesn't have to be even a whole bunch of colors. You could just pick one or two if you have to have two colors from your brand and use those. Very, very simple. And hey, decision made, move on. You don't have to stress about colors. Now, there was another question that came back to me about a business who is all about the aesthetic. Like they're very artistic, and they want to make sure that everything about their business that they're providing for their customers is beautiful. And I get that. I totally do. And that's the case where you probably want to hire a professional designer to help you out. But that doesn't necessarily have to happen on the first iteration of your app. You can make something clear and add a bit of your own artistic flair to it and just let it stand as it is. As long as it's not ugly, you can get by. But yes, if your entire business is based upon beautiful, artistic, things like that, then you're probably one of the people that wants to hire a professional designer to help you out with your colors and how pretty things are on the screen. Okay, the next question. Just double checking. It's always fun to be live streaming on two places to check. Nope. So this is both a question and a related recent story. So I was asked, what about setting up for the launch. How do you pick your launch date? Okay, there's a lot of things, like a lot of things that can go wrong in a launch. So this is why we have our step 5 beta. We want to make sure that we jump through all the launch hoops on our beta before we go for our big splashy launch. So my recommendation about picking launch dates and, nailing them, because it's never fun to miss a launch date, is to ensure that you have had a beta, you have tested out everything, you've been through a beta review in the App Store, so you know that your app is pretty good. Now, the actual release app review is going to be a little bit more stringent. You may still run into problems, but if you follow the checklist from the launch, you should be okay there too. However, getting back to the beta, your beta should be well underway, and you should have worked out many, if not all, of the problems of your app and your entire launch release process at the beta stage. And when you've reached that point, that's when you can actually pick and start announcing to the world your launch date. If you do it before then, you're going to risk running into problems. Now, I did say there was a story involved here, and there is a recent story. The city of Calgary, that's my old hometown there, where I lived for many years and worked. The city of Calgary just did a big splashy launch and failed because they had a date. They picked a date. It was July 1st, which is a holiday. Not always the greatest thing to do, picking a holiday to do a release, but hey, they chose July 1st as the launch date for their new transit app. So what does this transit app do? It lets people buy passes and use those passes no touch on their on transit. So that, today that seems like a really good idea. And they did a lot of things right. I mean, they rolled it out and it's not complete. It's just got basic everyday person passes, basic commuter passes. They don't have any of the specialty passes. So no low income, no seniors, no students. All of that, as far as I'm concerned, makes total sense. You don't want to hold off your launch waiting for every conceivable feature to be complete in your app that you have dreamed up. You want to have something as minimal as possible go out the door first, and make sure that you fix all the problems with it before you start spending a bunch more money working on additional features and edge cases. Okay, so they did that right, and that was great. What they didn't do, they did not have that checklist that I have, and they stumbled. They got refused at the app review in the Apple App Store because they violated one of the App Store guidelines. Now, they aren't saying which one that is, and that's okay. I don't actually need to know that. But that is not a mistake that a company or a city should be making. You should have gone through your app and gone through the guidelines in advance and make sure that you're following everything. Now, this is the reason. When you are in a position where you want to do a release, there's actually two ways of doing it, especially if you want to nail a particular date. And in this case, they did want to nail a particular date. They wanted to have this simultaneous release. They're doing an Android app and an iOS app at the same time, which that's kind of scary, guys. But they're doing that at the same time. And they had a specific date in mind. You shouldn't, if you have a specific date in mind and you're doing a simultaneous release in both stores, your app should already have passed review before you actually announce that date. That's simple. You can do that. You can submit your app and not actually release it to the public. You can specify a date in the future. And then when the reviewer reviews it and approves it, then it just sits there waiting for that actual release date, which is fine. But what happened was they announced a release date, then they submitted it for app review, and they failed the review. And then they had to resubmit, which they obviously had to fix the problem and then resubmit a new version of the app, which they did on June 30th. Okay, here's the other thing that you have to know. Failing app review is a bad thing. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's a bad thing because your app goes from just another app that somebody's going through and ticking boxes on to the list of apps that failed review. That's like another level up, and now you're going to be subject to even more intense scrutiny. It's no longer going to be somebody just checking boxes. Now they're going to be looking harder at your app. And because you're not in that just checking boxes version of the review, it's going to take longer because that's going to go to a real person instead of some automated process. And it's going to take longer. So you don't know how long it's going to take. It could take a day. It could take 3 days. It could take a week. Heck, I've seen apps that failed app review take a month to get past app review again. Because now someone is going through and checking absolutely everything in the app. And they're going to be looking at things that otherwise might not have been looked at, that otherwise might have just been passed. They're going to find reasons to refuse you again. And that's just a fact of life in the App Store. This is what happens. So, one of your goals when you're releasing a new app is go through that checklist and nail that first app review, because that keeps you in that sweet spot where people should just pass you for review over and over then. Unless you're doing something really sketchy. And then, look out, you're going to get caught. Okay, so I have not got any additional questions here. So I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. I will have some more Q&As happening in the next 10 days or so. So I hope you join me then. And I will be releasing the fourth and final video of our cruise to app success on Thursday. So I'll look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.